This is Nipper, and he's our official greeter here at the Webster Museum. And in 1884, there was a real little dog named Nipper, and he's named Nipper because he nipped at people's legs. And so eventually, he became the mascot of the RCA Victor Record Company. And so Nipper has a history. He was even at Bay Road School at one time, and some of you may remember when he was at Bay Road School. So he's come to live at the museum and is our greeter. This area where we live right now, that we call Webster, was originally the north part of Penfield. So it was North Penfield. And one time there were about 2,000 people living here. And at one time in 1839, a group of Webster farmers went into Rochester to hear a speaker, Mr. Daniel Webster. They were very impressed with what he had to say. And he was very concerned and interested in the future of our country. So they came back, had a discussion, decided that maybe the north part could withdraw and become its own town. They voted, that happened in 1840, and they decided to name the town after Mr. Daniel Webster. Early Webster had a number of large farms and many, many fruit growers. So if you come to the Webster Museum, you'll be able to see an example of an orchard that almost every farm had. Apples, cherries, peaches. And then they would dry these. Again, if you come to the museum, you can see our process showing you how they were dried, boxed, and sold here and abroad. Welcome to our Webster Museum schoolroom. I'm going to gather anyone who's coming to school today, and we're going into the schoolroom. Please take your seats, and we'll begin. These desks were made available, they were developed around 1920. Before that, people just sometimes sat on benches, but these are very nice because you could store your books and so on underneath. That was a new addition. So looking around our classroom, is it different than the one you go to today or one that you may have gone to? Schoolrooms have changed throughout the years. So we'll start over here with this slate. The slate would be used for a number of things, but one of the good things is you would use it for writing. It was very easy to use. You could clean it off and start again. So you could look up along the top edge of the schoolroom and you could see examples of writing, and then you could sit down at your desk and your teacher would ask you to write those letters. If you're watching from home, perhaps you could practice. We would have books, and the first graders would sit over here, second graders here, third grade, fourth grade, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And if you were an upper grade student, it would be your responsibility to help the lower grade students with whatever they were working on. So the teacher would count on your help when things were being taught over here. Now, write it. I used some chalk to write on this slate. There were other writing utensils that we would use on paper. Today we use paper, but after the slates came early paper, and it would go on your desk, and then you would use a tool. It was called a nib pen because it had a point on the end. And you would dip your nib pen into the ink that was in a bottle under here, and you would write. And you had to keep dipping and dipping because it ran out very, very quickly. Then when it got clogged with ink, you had a pen wiper. So you could wipe the ink right off if it got stuck on your pen. Before the nib pen came a quill pen. These were used for lots and lots of years, and you would have to have a knife to sharpen the point all the time because the point would wear down. Let's look around our classroom. Chalkboard, or a slate board, it was sometimes called, made from a stone called slate, right from the earth. And they discovered that it was really easy to use, and so you could write on the chalkboard. People liked writing on the chalkboard. If you look around, do you see a drinking fountain here anywhere? I don't see a drinking fountain. Well, that's because at the time this school was in session, this was your drinking fountain. Someone would have to go out to the pump the pail full of water, then your dipper, you would dip in and have a sip. That was your early drinking fountain. Pencil box. After people stopped using the slates and started using paper, then you could use a pencil. And then pretty soon, people developed boxes to keep your pencils in. So you carried your pencil box back and forth to school. Now, teachers could every once in a while, if somebody really misbehaved, they might give you a little swat with this paddle. And you see it's got little holes in it? That made the paddle even more swift as it went through the air and hit the misbehaving student. And then, if you really misbehaved, if you look over there in the corner, there's a cone-shaped hat that says dunce on it. And people did not want to do that. You had to sit on a stool facing the wall and wear that hat. And that let the rest of the class know that you had done something really, really bad. Arithmetic. One of the classes that we would do every day was arithmetic. Whatever is arithmetic. Well, let me show you. This is arithmetic. Today, we call it something different, and I'll let you tell yourself or your family, what do we call it today? Now, the winter time was cold, so we needed a stove to heat the room. This is a very nice stove that you would put a fuel in it called coal. The coal was dug from the ground, and sometimes different families furnished coal for a week. If you had a wood stove in your classroom instead of a coal stove, then a family would provide the wood for a week. There's an old story that if your family provided the fuel, you could sit closest to the stove that week. We don't know if that's true, but it's a good story. Also, you would have to bring your lunch. Do you see a cafeteria in here anywhere? I don't see a cafeteria. So, you'd have to bring your own lunch. And we have a variety of what we call lunch pails. So, in the morning, someone at your house, and maybe even you, would put in the pail whatever you thought you might be having for lunch. Now, in the winter time, you could bring soup, and it would go right on the stove, just like these are over here. In the summertime, you might bring fruit or other things, depending on what you liked for lunch, would go in your lunch pail. Maps. Maps show us where we are, where we can go, or what an area looks like. And you can learn from the maps the states, the rivers, the mountains, the towns. So maps are a very, very important part of a schoolroom. Most schools had a picture of this gentleman. This is our very first president, Mr. George Washington. And he was often just on a wall in a schoolroom to remind us of the beginning of our country. Our schoolroom has Abraham Lincoln as well. And he too was an important president, and so we like to think of honoring him as well. Over here, on dark days, when it was raining or snowing and cold, this would be what you would get your light from. There would be oil in the bottom and a wick, if you can see it, going down into the oil. The wick would soak up the oil, be rolled up here, and lighted. That would give you quite a bit of light. And this is a special one because it has metal back here. Sometimes it would be a mirror, but that would give you twice as much light with the reflection. This is a photograph of some students in a school sitting at desks very similar to these, and note how they're dressed. Part of the fun of history is clothing. It gives you a part of, it tells you sometimes almost the dates of when these pictures were taken. So the boys and girls in these photos would have been in a school just like this. People often kept what they called a diary. It's a book where every day you write down information on what you're thinking that day or how you're feeling that day. And in this one, the person started with the weather every day. So, and this one is quite old. And so you can go back and you can read about how life was on May 9th, 1940. And it was very cold that day. So it's interesting reading, and they're so good to have because they let us know where people were working, how they were working, what they were doing, did they like school, all of those things. There was a third grade teacher in Webster who was instrumental in the beginning of our whole museum, but he particularly liked this classroom. He was the teacher at Bay Road, and so we have an honor for him. His name was Richard Batesing, third grade teacher at Bay Road School. And we thank him really for putting this all together, that we can come and visit